What's up, guys? It's Coach Grant with First Down Training, and today we're going to be breaking down 2 ways that quarterbacks can improve their arm strength and be able to increase throw velocity on their throws. So this video, by doing these 2 things, will help you add more distance to your deep ball and get more velocity on those short intermediate throws over the middle. So I hope this video helps you guys out. But also, fellas, if you're a quarterback and you want to get better at football IQ, you want to improve your football IQ, increase your football IQ, check out that very first link in the description below where you can get access to over 500 videos on how quarterbacks can read defenses. We break down every single defense into a specific playlist. This is our Cover 4 playlist where we have probably over 100 different videos on different play concepts, what to look for against Cover 4, the work. So if you're a QB and this interests you and you want to get a better mental side of things, check out that very first link below. Let's get started. So obviously throw power, fellas. If you're familiar with our channel, maybe not, it comes from 2 specific places. It comes from legs and hips. Those are the 2 places where you're going to get throw power, you're going to get throw distance, and today we're going to talk about how to use that. So this is a clip here from Baker Mayfield. Now, Baker Mayfield, not the biggest guy in the world, right? Maybe 6 foot, 6'1", not a huge guy, right? But you see that he has a lot of velocity on the ball and can throw this ball a mile. Now, regardless of your opinion on him, whether you think he's a good quarterback, whatever, he's in the league and he can absolutely rip it at his size. So he must be doing something correct. And it comes from the weight transfer from your back leg and the rotation of your hips to get more velocity on the ball. So when Mayfield is in this position to throw, this is probably the key spot that you want to try to be into. Weight is loaded on this back leg. His back foot is underneath his back shoulder, and he's light on the front foot. I'm sure all of you as a quarterback have probably heard the term weight transfer before. Weight transfer is essentially when you take this weight that you have loaded on your back leg and you're shifting it to the front foot. That shift of weight right there, you see how his back leg is coming through, not his back foot, more so his back quad is shifting the weight to the front foot. That is where your power comes from, because the entire goal of the throwing motion is to be able to get this back hip to rotate through before the ball. They call that chasing the hip. They want the football to be chasing your back hip. That tells me that I'm rotating, and that tells me that I'm getting my hips involved with the throw. That is where throw power comes from. Now, there are a couple other things that tie into that, and we're going to show you guys some positive and negative examples of this today. So when he's going to throw, a lot of quarterbacks, the mistake that they'll make is they will push off of their foot. So they've probably heard the phrase, hey, you want to drive off the middle arch of your back foot. You want to push off the back foot like you're pushing off of a baseball rubber, like you're a pitcher. That is not what we want to do, because that can create a very long stride. When you're a quarterback, your power comes from this back foot, like I said, being loaded, but also being underneath your shoulder. Because when you decide to drive and that back foot is underneath your shoulder, that allows your hips to rotate through. When you guys stand, it's an old school method at the very wide base where your feet are super wide outside of your shoulders and you try to drive, there is no hip rotation like that. You can literally try it right now. Stand up wherever you're watching this, have your feet spread apart super wide and try to rotate at your hips. You can't do it, right? But now try to move that back foot underneath your back shoulder and try to rotate at your hips. It's a lot easier. It's a lot easier to get your hips to have that full rotation. So that's the pre-throw position that we need to get to. But now where a lot of guys will go wrong is they won't drive off of this quad. They won't shift the weight. Like I said, they'll push off of the foot. And then they end up right back to that wide base. They'll push off of this back foot, but because it's underneath their shoulder, this front stride will get very long. So they'll push, and then the stride ends up being long, their back foot ends up here, and then they have no hip rotation. So we have to make sure, fellas, to get more velocity, it is a shift of weight from your quad, from your glute, however you want to think of it, but you are shifting the weight here. Because now when you shift that weight to your front foot or your front quad, if you will, that is what gets the hips to rotate through. A lot of quarterbacks think about it in 2 parts. They think, oh, okay, I got to push and then I have to rotate with my hips. The hip rotation comes from the shift of weight. When you shift weight to that front foot and that allows your stride to come down quick, that will get your hips to rotate through. You just have to make sure that we're not pushing off the foot and end up in this very wide base. So let's play this thing again, full speed one more time. Then we're going to show a negative example of a mistake that quarterbacks will make when they're trying to throw this deep ball. So as quarterbacks, right, we're rotational athletes. And as just an athlete in general, just a person, you're going to rotate from 2 areas, your hips or your shoulders. Those are the 2 places of rotation for rotational athletes. Now, when it comes down to throwing a deep ball, when it comes down to having accuracy while you're throwing with arm strength, you have to make sure that you're able to generate torque, number 1, and we'll talk about where torque comes from. But also number 2, you have to have a consistent release point so that arm strength is actually accurate. Because anybody could throw the ball a mile, but is it going to be accurate? Can you hit the receiver on the money? And that's what this quarterback position is about. So we're looking at this quarterback right here. Now, not to knock on this kid, but you see he's in the position that we were talking about. Back foot under his frame, weight loaded on the back leg. But what goes wrong here? So I'm going to play this full speed. So he has a very long stride to the left of his body, and he swings that upper half out of there. So like I said, we're either going to rotate from where? Your hips or your shoulders. So when you guys are in that position with your back leg, and this front stride is not going like down now because of the weight shift from your quad, and it opens up to the left, what do you think is going to happen? Your hips aren't going to rotate. You see how there's really not much hip rotation right there. His leg is extending. His leg stays wide because that front foot took forever to get down. Now, whether that's because the QB's pushing off the foot or whether that's because he's opening up the foot to try to get arm strength, that still prevents that hip rotation. Fellas, when you guys go to throw, power, like I said, comes from the legs, comes from the hips, but it also comes from torque. When this QB goes back with the football, this is a perfect position with his upper half. You see how his upper half slightly rotates? But when that upper half slightly rotates and that front foot is stepping to the left, there is no torque. It is just swinging your entire body open to the left. And when your upper body swings, that release point swings outside of your frame as well, and we can lose that arm strength and we can lose velocity on the ball because I don't have that hip rotation. I don't have that torque. What we want is we want that front stride to be down right now because we are shifting weight and those shoulders go back, so I'm loaded, and that rotation with the front side closed off a little bit, that's where my velocity comes from. We go back to that clip here from Baker Mayfield. Watch what his front side does when his front foot gets down. You see how his front side stays loaded? He closes off on the front side because that separation of shoulders as he is shifting weight is what creates velocity. Because when your hips go through before the shoulders go through, that is the correct throwing sequence. That is how we can get velocity, but remain consistent with my front side. So now when his shoulders go back and it times up with the hip rotation, it's almost like hitting a golf ball. It's almost like hitting a baseball. But when you watch this next quarterback, when he goes back with his shoulders, because the front foot steps left, when that foot gets down, his front side's coming open. And when your front side rips open, because there is no hip rotation, what does that do to your release point? Your release point gets flawed and it goes outside of your frame. You dip out of there with the shoulder. You lean out of there with the head. Now, who's to say this throw might not have velocity? Because like I said, velocity either comes from hips or it comes from shoulder rotation. But if we don't have that separation of hips and shoulders, if your shoulders don't go loaded back as you're transferring through, this front side pulls and that affects the consistency of the ball. The consistency comes from your upper half being able to stay level. Your hands, they're not leaning out of it. Your shoulders are staying level. Your hips are staying parallel to the target, wherever he's throwing this ball, because the hip rotation brought the arm through. We cannot lean out of the throw, fellas. So let's play this thing again, full speed. So make sure, fellas, when it's time to go, we are shifting weight from here and we are shifting through. The goal is to get the front stride down as the shoulders are loaded so that hip rotation brings the ball through and I don't feel the need to lean out of there with my head and with my front shoulder. Let's play this thing again, full speed. Again, fellas, make sure that that front stride is not swinging open and it is not swinging long, which is what we're going to look at in this next clip. So this is an example of a QB overstriding. So as you can see, his front side, very similar to the last clip, does the exact same thing. Now, this wasn't a case of a QB being in this position and then opening way up to the left. It was the case of a QB pushing off of his foot. So you see how when he gets back in this drop, he plants, he's in that good position that we were just talking about in that clip from Baker Mayfield. And he's throwing this like bang 8 post that you have to rip with velocity. Now look where his back foot is, under the frame, back foot is in a good spot, but when he goes to drive, he pushes off of the foot. So watch what happens with his front stride. Long front stride. And you see how the leg extends. That is when you are not shifting from the quad, fellas. That is when you are pushing from the foot. Now, again, not to knock this guy. He just hasn't been coached up properly on this. When that front foot goes long, look what happens to the hips. The hips are not rotating. That back hip is staying here. The shoulders end up beating the hip. Remember we talked about that chasing the hip? You want the ball to chase your hip. That doesn't happen on this one because the long stride made his base incredibly wide, so now there's no hip rotation. So like we were talking about in the last clip, when there's no hip rotation, what do you resort to? What gets the ball through? the upper half. So what he does is he swings that elbow down. He starts to lean out of the throw a little bit with his head. So watch what that does to his release point. You see how his release point's very high? That is going to be inconsistent. Now, again, he throws this thing with a ton of velocity because that elbow pulling down will give you velocity. But if you release it too early with that super high release, ball's going high. You release it too late because you're coming down on the ball, that ball's going to go on the ground. We want to be rotational at my hips because that's where controlled power comes from. Our goal is trying to develop controlled throw velocity. So let's play this thing again, full speed, one more time, then we'll show a good example of Jimmy Garoppolo doing the proper stride and keeping his upper half square. So again, Jimmy G's recovering from shoulder surgery, I believe, in this clip, but still has a lot of velocity on this throw. So let's play it full speed. So he goes back into his drop, same back leg position as the last quarterback, but this is a much more controlled velocity and a consistent velocity. So he goes back, does this shuffle drop, where's his back foot? Underneath the frame. Now, watch the difference here. He doesn't push off the foot. It is a shift of weight. He shifts the weight forward. You see how that shift is getting the front foot to go down? That is what we want because now his back foot's in a good position to where his hips can rotate and the front foot is getting down while what is closed? The front shoulder. So he's here, the hip rotation, the front hip coming open, the weight transferring through. That is what will bring the ball through. And look what this is. Ball is trailing the back hip. And look where his upper half is, not leaning out of there. So where's his release point? At a consistent spot where he can repeat this type of throw. And you see how his release point is natural. It's naturally higher, but it's not outside of his frame. The elbow isn't down by his hip. He's not leaning out of it because if he does, that ball's going to sail high on him. He stays level with the shoulders, level with the hips, and the hip rotation is what brings this throw through. That is an effortless throw. That throw puts no stress on the elbow, on the shoulder. Plus, it still has velocity, and plus, it can still be consistent. Let's play this thing again, full speed one more time. That is textbook right there from Jimmy G, shifting weight and letting those hips rotate through on that pass. All right, fellas, I really want to thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. If you guys have any questions at all, don't hesitate to leave those in the comment section below. I know it's kind of a longer video and, some concepts that some of you may not be familiar, so feel free. I'm happy to help you guys out and answer anything that you guys have. And also, guys, if you are interested in our 500-plus coverage breakdown videos, check out that very first link in the description below. I'll see you guys next time.